Yay, beards indeed. And it was actually Charles Darwin way back in 1871 in his second major book called Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex, where he first proposed that beards and mustaches worn by men were the result of evolution via sexual selection. And he thought that beards and mustaches probably played a much larger role in male-male competition than they did in active female mate choice. Let's talk about it. And something I've been really enjoying over the last few years is we're seeing renewed research into the evolutionary underpinnings of male facial hair, with studies like this finding that participants were much more quick to identify indications of anger on a man's face when he was wearing a beard than when he wasn't wearing a beard, suggesting that facial hair and beards specifically might aid in communication related to competition. If you and I can communicate to each other that much quicker that I'm angry and you're angry, we might actually avoid a physical fight where we get hurt. In other words, just like in a lot of animals, beards might help us with sort of a graded signaling system where it becomes more and more obvious my intentions or my position related to you when I'm wearing a beard, indicating my anger. I was trying to pull an angry face, but I'm actually kind of too happy talking about this subject. Right? But you and I could actually avoid a physical fight if we're doing a good job of communicating our anger, right? And at some point, one or the other of us might de-escalate, disengage, and we avoid potentially getting hurt. But regardless, this study found that it seems to be easier to determine a man's state of anger when they're wearing a beard than when they're not wearing a beard. And then we have this study from 2020 that showed female participants a series of men's faces that differed in facial hair and then asked them to rate those faces based on attractiveness. Now, they also asked these women in the study to take a survey where they asked them all sorts of questions like, how many more children do you plan on having or would you like to have? What is your level of disgust when it comes to parasites and pathogens, right? Because anytime we have hair, there's a potential for parasites and pathogens. So what they found was that when it came to attraction, the females that found bearded men the most attractive were the women who wanted to have the most kids, right? So in other words, the women who were participating in the survey and the study who wanted to have more kids found or showed the highest levels of attraction to bearded men's faces, whereas women who were done having children or not interested in having children didn't show nearly as strong a preference or at all for male faces wearing beards versus those not wearing beards. But then in addition to that, one confounding factor they found was that women who rated themselves as particularly disgusted by pathogens and parasites had a strong preference for clean-shaven male faces. They didn't like the beards because, again, the beards and facial hair and hair in general can be sources and sites for pathogens and parasites. So there's something really complicated going on in human mate choice when it comes to males wearing facial hair.